of hearing endless amounts of doom and gloom about the outlook for the economy, in particular small business. So tonight we're going to be focusing on why it's important for small business owners to be positive.
So tonight we're joined in the studio by Peter Sullivan from Australian Business Training to focus on the silver lining to this economic cloud. Welcome to the program, Peter.
Well, thank you.
Why is optimism important for small business owners?
Well, it's probably more important now than ever, because when we're working with business, I always ask how things are going. And we're sort of getting two camps at the moment. Some people are saying it's tougher than it's ever been before, and it's more difficult than it's ever been before, and it's more stressful than it's ever been before. But maybe it's the minority of saying, yeah, well, it is difficult and it is hard, but we're finding it more challenging and more rewarding than ever been before. And the only difference is it's not the environment, it's their attitude, that optimism that gets people through. One of the things that optimists do is they seem to manage that pressure better. They tend to be able to press on and maintain their motivation in the face of adversity. And that's the core skill of optimists.
So what impact does this optimism have, though?
Look, there's probably more than 1,000 research papers now written on this area, and three main camps. Optimists live longer. I know that's not our topic, but that's not a bad payoff out of it.
I'll sign off for that.
It's probably a blinding flash of the obvious to say optimists are happier, but there's reams of evidence now showing that optimists do better, and particularly in tough areas like when you're in a leadership and when you're managing a business, you need hope. You need to give your people hope. So optimism is a critical factor there. Optimists also, when you've got optimism and talent and motivation, it literally doubles your chance of success if you're an optimist.
Right, okay, that's important points. With so much negativity out there, we seem to be getting barraged with it every day. Is it being a little bit delusional to say, well, I want to be an optimist?
You're getting a little bit pessimistic around my optimism.
I'll try not to.
Look, you could break it in a couple of ways, right? There is a delusional optimism, right? Some people who kid themselves, and some of that glib positive thinking is a bit like that. You know, it's a bit like the guy that fell off a 40-storey building. Somebody heard him going past the 22nd floor saying, so far, so good. You know, that attitude won't get you anywhere. What people need is a tough-minded optimism. It's a mindset that sees problems as temporary, in other words, fixable and changeable. What real optimism is being able to corral a problem. Like if something goes wrong, like if you burn the toast in the morning, some people can't let that go and they'll take that negative attitude through the whole day. Or they might lose an account and that spills over. Whereas optimists have this ability to corral a problem and not let it affect other areas of their life.
Okay, so what are some of the advice that you can give on how to improve our optimism? We may all want to, but how do we do it?
Yeah. One of the things is responsibility here. Most of us look at our environment, particularly now, and blame the environment from the way we are. We talk about absolute responsibility, what I call the three fingers of responsibility: how I think, how I feel, and how I act. So one of the things you can do to build optimism is change cause and effect, and realise it's not the world that impacts you, it's the way you see that world. It's your optimism, it's through that filter. Second thing is start to catch that thinking. Like psychologists say that we have 60 or 70,000 thoughts a day. Now, you don't have time to sift through those, but the clue is try and find that little internal dialogue, that little voice in your head. Some people might be saying, what's the little voice? Well, that's the little voice. How we think is a learnt habit of thought that's patterned in there, a little bit hard to recognise initially, so catch it. The other thing is, then when you catch that thought, just saying, is this thinking helping me? Will this get me towards my goals? And when you challenge that thinking is a good way of doing it. I'll give you a little exercise. Right? Simple one for people to do. It's called PVS to BVS. PVS to BVS. PVS is a pessimistic view of a situation. Human beings are only hot-wired up to see the pessimism or the downside. Right? So write down your pessimistic view and then find a BVS. A BVS is a better view of a situation. Like, what's another way of looking at it? What's a better way of looking at it? How else could we look at that? And then sift through those views of it and say, which is the best way for my business?
All right, would you say most small business owners that you meet are optimistic or pessimistic?
I think most would want to be optimistic, and most tell us they are optimistic. But there's a real difference between having positive goals and being an optimist. A lot of people say that they're optimists, but we've been working now more than 10 years in this area and measured thousands of people in Australia and New Zealand and even into South Africa. And we find that about 2/3 of people haven't got the attitude, haven't got the mindset to be able to sustain adversity. that they can't manage adversity at their very best. So what we've got people here with talent, we've got people with initial motivation, but when things get tough, they sometimes lose heart. You know, they start to fade a bit, and they're just not as resilient.
So how can you tell if you're optimistic or pessimistic?
Well, let me give it a couple of simple ways. One is catch it at the behavioural level. If you're procrastinating, avoiding, putting things off, and you're doing that more than you used to, probably pessimism there. If you find yourself overreacting to situations and impulsive about it, could be pessimism. So that's the behavioural level. You can also catch it at the emotional level. If you find yourself being more discouraged than you used to be, if you're finding yourself losing heart and losing motivation, or if hostility is creeping in. So you can catch it at that emotional level. And the third way is just to catch that little voice. But it's a bit like tuning in a radio, you know, an old AM station, you're trying to tune in. But once you start to recognise that little voice, you can start to catch it and turn it around.
Okay. All right, Peter Sullivan from Australian Business Training, thanks very much for joining us tonight.
Pleasure.
Well, stay with us. We've got plenty more to come on Moneymakers after the break.